The Syrians were expected to press their advantage.
We must keep on fighting with all our courage, faith, and trust, as a nation that knows we're fighting for our lives. And we are fighting for our lives.
Israel's defeat appeared imminent, but on the fourth day, the Syrians ran into a large Israeli force. Israel had been able to divert troops to the Syrian front because the Egyptian army had halted. Syria's President Assad demanded to know why the Egyptians were not advancing through the Sinai as agreed.
The president kept phoning Sadat and insisting, "This is not what we agreed." Sadat never gave him a straight answer.
Syria appealed over Sadat's head to the Soviet Union, still Egypt's patron. The Soviet Prime Minister came to Cairo to sort things out.
Prime Minister Kosygin kept asking Sadat why his forces had stopped without taking the Sinai. He was infuriated by Sadat's answers.
President Sadat yielded to Soviet pressure and gave the order to advance, much to the dismay of his chief of staff.
It was doomed to failure from the start. Israel's air force was much stronger than ours.
Now the war began to swing Israel's way. In 3 hours, 250 Egyptian tanks were destroyed. But Egypt still had 2 armies in the Sinai. The Israelis planned a daring coup. They set out to cut through the gap in the Egyptian lines, create a bridgehead over the canal, and sweep around to isolate the Egyptian Third Army. The architect of the plan was General Ariel Sharon.
We slipped through the Egyptian lines without major problems. But when we reached the canal, there was a ferocious battle. Eventually, at 1 in the morning, the paratroopers crossed to the other side in dinghies.
The next day, Israeli forces raced across the canal to secure their bridgehead.
I was at the canal. I could see the tanks crossing and the trees on the other side. It was a great feeling.
Israel's troops were now only hours from Cairo. President Sadat begged the Soviets to arrange a ceasefire.
The Israelis crossed the canal, and about 24 hours later, we got a message from Brezhnev inviting me to come to Moscow.
We thought Kissinger's visit to Moscow would be useful. He could help us stop the conflict.
We thought it would give the Israelis more time if I went to Moscow, because nothing could happen until I got there. While I was in the air, Nixon sent a message directly to Brezhnev saying that I was fully authorized to conclude, but I frankly wanted to stall.
The Soviets were in such a hurry to end the fighting that General Secretary Brezhnev led the talks with Kissinger himself.
He insisted that the advance be stopped. In return, Kissinger wanted the Arabs to recognize Israel's right to exist.
what we said was that there should be direct negotiations at some point between the Arabs and Israel. I told Brezhnev I would carefully communicate everything he said to Washington, but that there had to be some time interval so that I could get the president's views. And he said, no, here's a message. And he gave me power of attorney, that, in effect, power of attorney that the president had given me, which did not thrill me.
The Secretary of State realized he could stall no longer. While still in Moscow, he agreed to terms for a ceasefire. But it was another 5 days before the war ended. During that time, the Israelis encircled the Egyptian Third Army. A day later, the opposing generals met in the desert to work out how to disentangle their forces. It was the first formal meeting of Egyptian and Israeli officers in 25 years.
He offered me coffee. I said, no, thank you. He asked, can I get you anything else? I said, no. He said, it's cold. Can I get you a coat? I said, no, thank you. That was the end of the first meeting.
It was a week before the Egyptian general began to relax.
We went out and sat on the sand. We put a map down in front of us, and we put stones on it. We started to talk about how to disengage our forces.
I said, look, we have to end the friction between our forces. The answer is, you go back to the west side of the canal, and we will pull back to the east side.
I went and told Sadat we had reached an agreement. He was pleased with what we had achieved.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
Each side's dead were returned, and Israel allowed supplies through to the trapped Egyptians. But Sadat wanted more than a ceasefire and a disengagement. He wanted the Sinai back. But once again, he would talk only to the Americans.
He came out in military uniforms and said, I need a Kissinger plan. I agreed to do a shuttle and settle it fast, and he said he would make major concessions to make it possible.
Kissinger decided the way forward was to bring all the parties to a peace conference in Geneva.
I never thought you would kiss a woman.
It's kissing her. After all, it's kissing her. I wonder who's kissing her now.
The Egyptians and Israelis agreed to attend the conference. And then there was President Assad of Syria.
I had heard he was impossible, but he greeted me with extraordinary politeness and courtesy. And I said, you know, it's amazing. They all accuse you of being so difficult.
Whenever Kissinger wanted to change the date or venue, President Assad agreed. Kissinger told him, you are so accommodating.
I got overconfident, and I said, is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't? He said, yes, you didn't ask me whether I'm going to the conference. I said, are you? He said, no.
Assad did not want to negotiate with Israel. But Kissinger was able to get the rival armies to disengage. Sadat then attempted to strengthen his hand by embracing Syria